Hello, welcome everybody to today's Bay Nature Talk. It's great to see you all. Thank you for joining today at lunch. And before we begin, I'd like to invite everyone to turn their cameras on if they're able. It would be great to see you all in person and just see your lovely faces. So yeah, please, if you're comfortable, turn your cameras on for the duration of the talk. But please keep yourselves muted unless you have a question toward the end. My name is Leah Keener and I'm Bay Nature's event coordinator. I'm really excited to welcome you all today about this talk about banana slugs. And before we begin, I'd just like to introduce Bay Nature Magazine. For those of you who don't know, we're a quarterly print magazine based in Berkeley, California, and we cover nature and conservation topics that are local to the 9 counties of the Bay Area. And in addition, we're also working on building up our events program, which includes events like these, which are digital events, as well as in-person hikes and other outings. But please, if you'd be interested in free and discounted tickets to these events, please consider joining as a member. I'll send out a link for how to join in a follow-up email with the recording of this talk. And yes, this event will be recorded, and I'll send this link out to our YouTube in a few days after this event concludes. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. We'll be joined by Janet Leonard, who is a researcher of banana slug behavior at UC Santa Cruz, and she has built her career on understanding the mysterious sexual behavior of banana slugs and has worked with West Coast banana slugs for 20 years or more. So thank you so much, Janet, for joining us today, and I'll invite Janet on screen to present. And after her presentation, please feel free to enter your questions into the chat. And after the presentation concludes, I'll be calling on whoever has entered their questions in the chat to unmute and ask their questions, or I can also ask your questions for you. So without further ado, thank you so much, Janet, for joining us, and we're really excited to hear your presentation. Thanks.
Okay, can we share the screen now?
Yes, you should be.
All right. Oops. Yeah. So today I'm going to be, I hope we're not covering up part of the slide with these.
No, it looks great on my end.
Okay, great. All right. So today I'm here to talk to you about banana slugs. Banana slugs are famous in song and story, but I'm going to be talking about them particularly from the standpoint of evolution. Goals today are just to introduce banana slug, go quickly through some of their natural history, discuss the diversity within the genus in terms of species and so forth, and then get down to the good stuff and talk about banana slugs as a model system for the study of sexual selection. Banana slugs are slugs of the genus Areolimax. They are large slugs getting up to about 150 grams, which is about the same weight as a mouse. They get to be the size of a full-grown banana, hence the name. They're common and conspicuous in the right habitat. They're omnivorous. They'll eat about anything. Like all of the terrestrial snails and slugs, they're air-breathing, but they are confined to moist environments because they don't have much protection against evaporation. And what we all know about banana slugs is they're charismatic. They're famous in song and story. There's a banana slug string band. There are tchotchkes by the zillions. They're famous in movies, and they're the mascot of the University of California, Santa Cruz. The real banana slugs here are found in a variety of habitats. We'll talk about the different kind of food, something about their predators, their taxonomy, geographic distribution, and the phylogeography. That is how the different taxa are distributed geographically. And then we'll get on to sex and sexual selection, which is what it's all about in evolution. And why is oh, here we go. Okay, so banana slugs are mostly associated with temperate rainforests on the west coast of North America. I'm very, very proud of them. They're the only terrestrial non-insect invertebrate I know of that is featured in a postage stamp. This is a plate here on the land on the right of your screen is a nice drawing of a banana slug, not quite to scale. But they're also found in other habitats. Here's some pictures of a banana slug collected from a serpentine spring habitat up in Napa County. They've also been found in coastal ice plant in Pacific Grove. They serve a variety of functions in the ecosystem, most of which we're not familiar with. One thing we do know from scientific work is that they're important pollinators for our native ginger. If you're familiar with our native ginger, it has this beautiful little maroon flower, which is very inconspicuous, mostly because it's about an inch off the forest floor underneath the leaves, and it is pollinated by banana slugs. A lot of the work I'll be talking about was done in collaboration with the late John Pierce. And this is one of his favorite factoids about banana slugs is that they eat shit. They're omnivores and they can be found on feces, animal or human. There's a famous story of a man that used to work at a liberal arts college in Oakland. When he wanted to collect slugs for his classes, he would go out to the local, what was called in those days, a hobo jungle, and find a latrine area, and there would be plenty of slugs. What else do they eat? It's more a question of what they don't eat. They eat many kinds of plants. They're famous for eating poison oak. They'll eat a variety of mushrooms, including the death angel mushrooms. They'll eat detritus. They will eat carrion, dead animals. And there's a story about a man who was working with banana slugs and collected, along with his banana slugs, some salamanders, put them in the same glass jar. And when he next looked at the jar, the salamander consisted of a little few bones, and the banana slug was fatter. I once collected one off a damp road map along Skyline Boulevard in the Santa Cruz Mountains. They're predators. They can be eaten by things like garter snakes, salamanders, and newts. There's been some work showing that only certain populations of garter snakes are willing to eat banana slugs. Probably a variety of birds and small mammals will eat them, particularly when they're small, and there are some carnivorous snails and slugs that probably eat them. They seem to have what we call a size refuge. That is, when they're very small, just about anything will eat them as they get to be the size of a banana, and their mucus gets very thick and sticky. There aren't many things that eat them. In terms of their reproductive biology, which is the interesting part, they're all simultaneous hermaphrodites. That is to say, they are functionally male and female at the same time. They have internal fertilization. That is to say, they copulate. And they lay very large yolky eggs. In the certain species, they can get up to about half the size of a jelly bean. This shows a photograph of a copulating pair of one species, Areolimax buttoni, and here you can see the two peonies connecting the animals. So what Areolimax is a small genus of large slugs on the Pacific coast of North America. Currently, there are 8 known species, 2 of which need description, and they're distributed from San Diego County, California. Palomar Mountain State Park has a population, and they go as far north as somewhere near Juneau, Alaska. Widely distributed. In terms of the taxonomy, they're animals, obviously, they're mollusks, they're gastropods. In the subclass pulmonates, the order is Stylomatophora, that is the land snails and slugs. The family is called Arionidae and the genus Areolimax. Just for comparison, we talk about the dog family, then we have animals, phylum Chordata. Why is this doing this? Phylum Chordata, and then we have several different species here. You have your Canis familiaris, the domestic dog, which varies a lot in appearance, the Canis rufus, the red wolf, Canis latrans, coyote, blackback jackal, and the gray wolf. And they're all very similar in many ways. They vary in size, habitat, behavior, social structure, and a variety of characteristics. Similarly, with Areolimax, we have several different species in the genus. We have, from the upper left, Areolimax dolichophalus, that's the Santa Cruz species. Areolimax buttoni, which is north and east of the Golden Gate. Areolimax columbianus, which is found from, Patrick's Point in Humboldt County, California, north to Alaska. Californicus, which is basically San Mateo County species, and some others. In terms of physical appearance, they vary less than this box of presumably very closely related chocolate slugs. So how do we distinguish between species in a genus? Now, in any sort of organism, a major clue is anatomy. In land snails, it happens to be the case that reproductive anatomy is the most important thing. Nowadays, also, we want to look at molecular data, particularly gene structure, and mitochondrial DNA has been a very popular tool for that. The ultimate test is to find out whether two individuals from the population can interbreed and produce offspring that themselves reproduce. So famously, for example, horses and donkeys will breed, but the resulting mule is normally sterile. So those are definitely two different species. This actual interbreeding test has been done in very, very few cases. Normally, we infer reproductive isolation from the first two criteria. So here are the genitalia of Areolimax. This is from an old paper by Mead, who was the man that put the banana slug in with salamanders. And we can see differences in the genitalia. Here is the opening to the outside, what we call the common genital aperture. And up the one side, we have the vagina, vaginal musculature, which varies. Here's Californicus. It's very robust, strongly developed. In Columbianus, it's very weak. Straminius is weak. Brachyphallus, it's a little stronger than those two, but nothing like Californicus, and Dolichophallus similarly. Then there's the penile retractor muscle is a prominent feature. Here we have a huge lateral muscle from Californicus, whereas Columbianus is a small apical muscle. It's even smaller in Straminius. Brachyphallus, it's lateral, but smaller, and again, Dolichophallus. And these three species all have what we call an epiphallus, which is a long projection of the penis. So those are some differences. In fact, this epiphallus has been used to describe two subgenera. There's Meadarian, which has an epiphallus, and then the subgenus Areolimax. So they have very different penis structure. Here's some photos of the animals with the penis everted. Here we have this long yellow stringy thing is the penis of Dolichophallus. It's not the longest penis in the animal kingdom relative to size. That goes to a barnacle, but it's pretty impressive. And then we have this is buttoni, which has a wider and shorter penis without that projection at the end of it. So as I said, there are a number of described species and a couple that need description. Here we have the subgenus Areolimax in red, and I'm going to be talking today about the one in bold, Areolimax straminius. You'll see that in a video later. And then I'm going to compare that with two species of Californicus and Dolichophallus. I've got video of Dolichophallus. And one of the questions we want to answer as evolutionary biologists is, why are there so many species? Well, it all starts normally with geographic isolation. And from what we've seen in banana slugs, the distribution of species boundaries is similar to that of other organisms with low mobility on the West Coast, such as salamanders, such as many plants, and other slugs and snails. Just to give you an idea of the location of the different species, this is Columbianus, as I said, from extreme northern California to about Juneau, Alaska. In yellow, we have button eye, which is from northern California down to the Golden Gate and out into the East Bay, and as a matter of fact, as far east as Donner Lake and Tuolumne County. Then we have Straminius here in blue, which is basically along Big Sur and out into the Channel Islands. And there's a yet undescribed species out in Palomar Mountain State Park. Here in the immediate Bay Area, we have Brachyphallus in this, well, we have button eye is in the North Bay and actually gets into the Presidio. We have Brachyphallus and basically in San Francisco County, and again right around Pacific Grove. Californicus basically in San Mateo County, Dolichophallus, extreme southern San Mateo County, but basically Santa Cruz County. And then a new Straminius down from Monterey area along Big Sur. And then there's a yet undescribed species out on Fremont Peak. And so one question we want to ask is, why do the genitalia differ between species? And here's where we're going to start to talk about science, which is the good part. There's a hypothesis put forward by William Aberhart, who works with insects and spiders primarily. He predicted that where genital characters are useful, where genitalia are useful taxonomic characters at the level of species and subspecies, sexual selection has been important in the evolution. And the genitalia are the major taxonomic characters of many animals, including his insects and spiders. Also, since the 1890s, for the Stylometophan gastropods and most flowering plants. As most of you interested in natural history know, you distinguish taxa of flowers by the flower characteristics. So one of the questions we want to ask is then, is there evidence of sexual selection in banana slugs? And to know that, we need to ask a couple of questions. Has there really been rapid evolution of genital characters? That is, we need a taxonomy and phylogeny independent of the genital characters to see if they match. The second question is sexual selection important? Gonna need evidence of sexual selection other than rapid genital evolution. Okay, so first question, are the species really distinguished by genitalia? And to do this, what we're resorting to, and this work has not been published yet because we're not ready, we need more work on this, but some preliminary data. We're looking at molecular molecular genetics, looking particularly at genes on the mitochondrial DNA. And what we get when we compare the different taxa of banana slugs was this, we got was a surprise. The first thing we noticed from the top is the 3 taxa of Meadarian, described taxa, of Brachyphallus, Californicus, and Dolichophallus are, particularly Californicus and Dolichophallus, who were described as good species on the basis of genitalia, are basically indistinguishable. Molecularly. Where we look at Straminius, which is a different subgenus, it is in fact very distinct genetically. And its closest relative is Areolimax buttoni, which is geographically close. And then more distantly related, we have the Columbianus group. Now, interesting thing here is that we know of no particular morphological distinction between buttoni and Columbianus. So there we have clear molecular evidence of evolutionary separation, but no morphological evidence. And if we look at the different clades of Meadarian, we get very clear differences in the genitalia and also differences. This is a table of just the Meadarian species. We see differences, the genital morphology here, then body color is somewhat different. Egg size, Brachyphallus and Californicus are very similar, whereas Dolichophallus eggs are quite different, much larger. Mitochondrial genes, Brachyphallus is a bit different from Californicus and Dolichophallus, which are essentially identical. Hatchling color, Brachyphallus again is different than Californicus or Dolichophallus. And the sexual behavior of Brachyphallus and Californicus are distinct, but more similar to each other than they are to Dolichophallus. So each species has a unique set of sort of life history characteristics, as well as genital morphology. So go back to testing Eberhardt's hypothesis. We can say that there's good evidence for rapid evolution of genital characters, at least in Meadarian. And then we want to find out if sexual selection has been important in this evolution. So what we need to do then is to look at evidence of sexual selection other than rapid genital evolution. So what do we mean by sexual selection? Well, Darwin's famous theory of sexual selection was formed in order to explain some things that he didn't think could be explained by natural selection. That is, selection for increased reproductive success, survival and reproductive success. And those things were traits that seemed at first glance maladaptive. For example, the peacock's tail. Male peacocks have this huge, cumbersome tail. Makes it hard for them to fly, presumably hard to escape predators. But it turns out it's essential for attracting females, which is what a male peacock is most concerned with. And similarly, antlers in deer. Males have antlers, which they use in combat as a weapon, and fighting with other males is essential to get access to females. And according to Darwin's quote, that these characters are the result of sexual, not of ordinary selection, is clear, as unarmed, unornamented, or unattractive males would succeed equally well in leaving a numerous progeny if better endowed males were not present. So the critical experiment we want to do to test for sexual selection is to compare the reproductive success of a given male that has or doesn't have particular traits when he's in isolation with females or when he's in competition with other males. And this has essentially never been done. I think a couple of times with Drosophila, but it's not straightforward and is very rarely done. So we rely on indirect evidence. Just to show you sort of a plain vanilla species in terms of mating behavior. Here is Areolemax stramineus, the big sur species. Oops. I do not know why this is skipping ahead all the time. Okay, so this is speeded up 20 times because slugs are slow. And here we have a pair of slugs in the laboratory. They're encountered each other and they're lining up head to tail. It's important that they have their right sides together because the opening, this common genital aperture, is on the right side of the head. Here we see them lining up their common genital apertures. You'll see a little slit on the side of the head, and that is the common genital aperture, which becomes apparent as that area swells. And here they are starting to get connected. This species does about 20 minutes of courtship behavior, then they do a unilateral copulation for a minute or two, and then go back together and settle down for about an hour. Here we have simultaneous reciprocal copulation. You can see the peristalsis and the two peonies. There's a third animal that's trying to horn in here, and now they're withdrawing. So you can see the short, thick penis. Simultaneous reciprocal copulation lasts about an hour with a lot of variance. And that's pretty much that. So that's, as Areolemax goes, that's a pretty much plain vanilla sort of sexual behavior. In contrast, we see Areolemax dolichophalus. This is the Santa Cruz species. Good grief. And these guys, okay, so they're what I call anti-parallel, head to tail, right sides together, because if they have left sides together, this doesn't work. And then this species does 2 hours, more or less, of what I call biting and swinging courtship behavior. What it seems to serve to do is to get them tightly coiled so that their common genital apertures line up. And here we're now starting to see a little bit of penis in between the slugs. Now we see the two connected. You can see it clearly. The top penis, the bottom penis is less obvious. Now, if you look closely between the two heads, you'll see two different penis connecting them. And now we're withdrawing. One, we don't see the penis coming out, but the other one, it's very obvious. And so this copulation lasts roughly 2 hours with a lot of variation. So what we've got here then is we've seen that we have rapid evolution of genitalia, elaborate or expensive mating and courtship behavior. These animals will, even in the short species Stramineus, it's at least an hour and 20 minutes that they're together. And in the time that they're together, they are secreting mucus, both animals. And so they wind up producing a bed of mucus on the substrate. And the fact that this is sort of an expensive investment is demonstrated by their behavior of eating that bed of mucus at the end of copulation, therefore recycling the energy involved in that mucus production. Another thing it's that banana slugs are very famous for in and meets the criteria of expensive and or bizarre sexual behavior is a behavior that is called apophallation. So before I show this, apophallation was originally described by Dr. Harold Heath, who taught at the turn of the 20th century at Stanford. And he taught invertebrate zoology as one of his courses. And so they dissected different animals. And for gastropods, what he did was he would go out to the golf course at Stanford on a moist night and collect banana slugs. They were big, abundant, and cheap. And over the years, he noticed that these banana slugs, which were taxonomically characterized by their very large penis, then about 5% of these individuals would completely lack a penis, which struck him as odd. There was a description in the literature of banana slugs without a penis, and when those were sent to a taxonomist, this said taxonomy, Henry Pillsbury of Philadelphia, erected a new genus called Aphilarion for those animals. And now Heath was seeing both Californicus happened to be the species he was working with, and Aphilarion, what should be Aphilarion, on the 8th hole of the Stanford golf course, which seemed improbable. So he collected a bunch of students. He went out on a moist night to the 8th hole, put some slugs together, had the students watch them, and in a couple of cases, he saw the following behavior. Towards the end of the copulation, one individual would reach around this is so frustrating. Sorry about this. One of the individuals would reach around and start chewing on its partner's penis. As you can see here, this slug on the left is chewing on that white stringy thing, which is part of the penis of its partner. And now you can see the partner starting to squirm. It's not particularly happy about this. And what happens is the penis is chewed off. So he felt that this explained the penisless slugs he was finding on the golf course. And he published a little paper in the Vellager in which he's in the year 1915, in which he stated that the adaptive significance of the behavior remained to be explained. And it still pretty much is. It happens quite rarely. And so we still are not sure what's going on there. But it's extremely famous, and it was the sort of story that zoologists tell each other when they're out for beer at a conference. And it's the story that's got me interested in banana slugs, because I was been working for a number of years on sexual selection in hermaphrodites, particularly some sea slugs at that point. So John Pierce and I decided we'd get to the bottom of it. And so far in 20 years, we've produced a lot of information about the taxonomy and reproductive behavior, life history and so forth of these banana slugs. For example, we didn't know initially that all these different species have different reproductive behavior, different life history characteristics, and so forth. But we're still not entirely certain what's going on with the apophallation. But what we can conclude is that there's good evidence that, sexual selection is existing in these banana slugs, because the sexual behavior varies greatly by species, as do the genitalia. It's expensive and that it's lengthy, complicated, and involves a lot of movement. For example, that 2 hours of biting and head swinging behavior is a big energy expenditure if you're a slug. We get this bizarre behavior of apophallation. But this is still indirect evidence, as in most cases of sexual selection, we're using indirect evidence, and it's still a work in progress. I'm not sure we'll ever understand everything about banana slugs, but we know more than we used to. So thank you so much for your attention and your interest in natural history and banana slugs. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Hello, thank you so much. This was an amazing talk. So fascinating and loved all of the video clips. And we do have a number of questions in the chat. So I'll just be calling on those of you who've entered your questions. And for those of you who have more questions, please just type them in the chat and I'll call on you after that. But I'll just start from the top. I think our first question is from Lena. Lena, do you mind unmuting and asking your question? Otherwise, I'm also happy to ask if you'd prefer.
Oh, sure. Yeah, just curious about where banana slugs lay their eggs and how long do they take to hatch and how often do they lay them? And I'm assuming the slug doesn't hang out and wait for them to hatch, but just kind of curious about that. And
Yeah. Yeah, the banana slugs, in the laboratory, what we've noticed is that banana slugs tend to lay their eggs after a storm. So we've got animals in a consistently moist environment in boxes in the laboratory, but we get eggs starting usually October through February, and we have the impression that it typically happens a week or so after a good rain. It makes sense because the major source of mortality in the eggs of just about any slug is desiccation. So if you lay your eggs in the moist forest floor, they don't dig a hole like garden snails do, but they lay them in a moist place on the forest floor. And in the laboratory, they hatch out in about 7 weeks. Varies with temperature, so it probably takes a little bit longer in the field for the most part. So the idea is if you pick a good moist place after heavy rain, hopefully the moisture will be retained until your eggs have hatched. Yeah, so I hope that helps.
Thank you. No, that was a good question, and that's really helpful to hear. And then let's see, our next question is from Julie. Julie, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, I might have missed this, but I'm confused about the idea of banana slugs being hermaphrodites, but they copulate in pairs. Could you please go into that again? Thank you.
Okay, banana slugs are simultaneous hermaphrodites, which is to say that they are capable of reproducing and mating both as males and females at the same time. So when they mate in pairs, each slug, well, it varies with species. In the species you saw in the videos, each slug inserts its penis into its partner's penis. So the pair of individuals are connected during the copulation by 2 penises. Now, there are other species, such as Californicus, which do it differently. In Californicus, the copulation is unilateral. That is, one individual inserts its penis acting as a male and the other is a female. But then what they do after about 20 minutes is they switch roles. So the female becomes a male and the male becomes a female, at which point a lot of people get confused. And they will continue to copulate through about, I think the record is 7. There was a BBC photographer present for that one. BBC photographer, nature photographers have magic powers to make animals do extraordinary things. Usually it's 3 or 4 or 5 copulations in a series. So does that clarify?
Yes, thank you.
So it sounds like they don't reproduce individually, but they can just play both roles with partners.
Well, we do have in land snails and slugs in general, in the Stylometaphora, the ability to self-fertilize oftentimes varies from population to population within a species. That is, some places they can, other places they can't. And we've seen self-fertilization definitely in buttoneye and probably in Californicus and dolichophallus. So I don't trust any of them. I think any of them probably could self-fertilize under the right conditions. Typically in animals that self-fertilize, if there are sperm from a partner available, they will use that in preference.
Gotcha. Thank you for the clarification. We had another question from Ingrid. Ingrid, do you want to unmute and ask your question? I can also ask. I think Ingrid was asking, what is the lifespan of banana slugs?
Well, that's a good question. In the laboratory, I have had individuals that hatch in the laboratory that have lived 30 months. And I once found on the internet a statement that banana slugs lived 7 years, but I have not found any sort of documentation or rationale for thinking that. My guess is that, okay, banana slugs, the eggs are laid in the fall when the rains start. It takes a couple months for them to hatch. So if the eggs are laid in November, they're hatching end of January, beginning of February. And in fact, you find tiny little slugs out in the field during the spring. I think what normally happens is if it's a good year, if it's moist and they're in a good habitat, they grow up to be able to copulate by the time the monsoons come in late August, beginning of September, in late July, August. In a dry year, they're probably slower growing and not able to fully develop by then, but they start mating when they get to be a reasonable size and there's some moisture in the air. And so the youngest I've seen them mate in the lab is 10 months. I've seen them lay eggs at about a year. And I think probably a lot of slugs don't survive the following summer, but some do. I've had them in the lab live a couple of years. There are these ones that were sacrificed at 30 months were still laying eggs. I think certain individuals that were slow to get started laying eggs are in good conditions may live 2 years or so.
Thank you. Gotcha. Let's see, we have a question from Anna. Anna, do you want to unmute?
Sure. Hi, I was just wondering if the peonies ever go back, if you've ever observed that.
As far as we know, no. Now, a related question is, can an animal that's had its penis chewed off mate? And we have seen them mate as females. And actually, that video of Dolichophallus mating that I showed you, it turns out that one of the individuals in that video was the individual that got its penis chewed off in that last video. It actually only really got the tip chewed off, so it was able to insert the penis to mate at a later date. Now, whether or not I was able to transfer sperm at that point, I don't know. But that was sort of an unusual case. It was sitting there pretty quietly while getting its penis chewed off. Normally they object and writhe and try and get away, but that individual twitched a little bit, but didn't really carry on much. And I think that's probably because it was only lost the extreme tip, which maybe is less sensitive in terms of nerve endings.
Thank you. Let's see, we have a question from Richard. Richard, would you like to unmute? I think your question about their ecosystem role was a great one. Let's see. Or I can also read out loud. I think Richard was asking about, you had mentioned that these slugs eat poop. What is their role in the ecosystem? And is that part of it as like decomposers, or yeah, what is this banana slug's role in the ecosystem?
Well, they are omnivores. They're certainly detritivores. Basically, they'll eat anything that isn't moving too quickly. And so they probably are, there hasn't been a lot of study of this sort of thing, but they're probably important in getting rid of detritus, carrion, and so forth. They also feed on berries and other plants. They're probably important in dispersing seeds. The spores of mushrooms will catch and are bound to catch on the mucus that they're covered with. So they're dispersing spores of various fungi. That sort of a role.
Gotcha. Cool. Let's see. Actually going to skip to a question from Nancy. Nancy, would you mind unmuting and asking your question? I think it's a great one as well.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Leonard. This is really quite fascinating. I was wondering what the slugs do during the dry season. You did refer to the fact that a lot of them may not survive the first summer. How do they survive?
Well, as far as we know, well, one thing is if they're in a moist place, they just sort of hang out there. But a lot of them will go underground.
Mm.
There's a beautiful little book, almost a booklet, called The Banana Slug. It was written by a woman in Santa Cruz. She's not a biologist, but really into natural history. And so she was known locally as the banana slug lady. And one time, one of her neighbors was digging a hole for a hot tub in Soquel. And they called her over to see, because down 9 feet, they found banana slugs in burrows.
Wow.
As far as we know, banana slugs don't dig holes, but they do go down to bananas, animal burrows. And I've seen it. One time I had a colleague from Germany visiting, and she wanted to see some banana slugs, and it was August. So we weren't doing very well. We were driving through the Santa Cruz Mountains and went past this bank that really looked good for banana slugs, but nobody there. But a half hour later, we came back that way, and meanwhile, the marine layer had come in, and there were several banana slugs starting to stick their heads out of holes along the bank. So they find moisture and stay there, and one of the places they find it is burrows. Some of them don't have to go down burrows if they can find a stream bank, for example. That works.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your question, Nancy. And then I think I'll turn to Mary. Mary, you had a question about fire that I think Karen also echoed. Mary, do you mind unmuting and asking?
Yeah, just wondering, since they need the moisture, how did the CZU fire affect the Santa Cruz populations?
Well, that didn't help. I got a lot of questions that year about are the banana slugs going to go extinct? And I don't think so. Certainly they don't move fast enough to avoid fire. But they do go down burrows, they hang out in stream banks. They're very low to the ground. So the big problem, I think, for banana slugs is when they come back to the surface, is there anything there as food? I think those fires really knocked back populations, particularly locally. But they do have a high reproductive rate given proper conditions, and they're coming back where the vegetation is back.
Thank you. Gotcha. And then Karen, you had another question about surveying?
Yeah, I did, because I volunteer at Big Basin Redwood State Park. And, 20 some years ago, one of our volunteers would go out weekly to count the banana slugs there. You might have known him. And I was wondering, are there surveys that people do to see what the population is year to year, especially with global warming, et cetera, coming?
I don't know of any. Now, my colleague John Pierce was an ecologist, and so of course, the first thing he thought of when we started working with banana slugs is that we'd go out and do some transects and get some population estimates. And then we found out about them going down 9 feet underground. And another thing I knew from personal experience is that they will climb trees. When I lived up in Oregon, on the Oregon coast, before I started working with banana slugs, I had a bird feeder outside the window that was in a Sitka spruce that was growing up from the bottom of a cliff. So it was like 60, 70 feet in the air. And banana slugs would get into that bird feeder and get so full of millet that their little bodies would look lumpy. And I've seen them, they will climb. If it's raining hard and the ground is saturated, then it's too wet for banana slugs and they'll look for a dry place. And that house, they used to come through the gap in the patio doors to get inside in the wettest part of the winter. So when we found out that the banana slugs were living from high up in the trees down to 9 feet below ground, we sort of lost interest in running transects. We just didn't feel that it was going to be a very accurate estimate of populations.
Gotcha, thank you. I think so. We have about 5 minutes left, so we'll probably not get to everyone's questions. I'm so sorry, but I'll pick a couple now. One question would be, Annette, you had asked a question. Would you mind unmuting and asking?
Yeah, I think the question was already answered in regards to what happens after upperfolation. So thank you.
Okay, no problem. Let's see. Ingrid, you said you don't have a mic, so I'll ask this question for you maybe. But you had said, so the apophallation is pretty rare, and Ingrid was wondering how rare is that, and how often are slugs found without a penis?
Well, apophallation, the estimates we have from Heath's initial work was about 5 out of 100 individuals in Californicus from that population. And from what I've seen in the lab, that's about right. In its lifetime, about 5 out of 100 slugs will lose a penis at some point, and they'll copulate many times. However, there is another reason that you can find slugs without a penis, and Heath didn't know this. But there was some work that never got published from a master's thesis at Mills College in the 50s that we found when we had observed the similar phenomenon in the lab, and that is some individuals are just born without a penis. And again, this is something that's known in pulmonate gastropods, that there are whole species that lack a penis. There are many cases of species in which certain populations will lack a penis. It's called aphallation rather than aphaly rather than apophallation. And it has evolved 27 or 30 times in the Stylomatophora alone. And we haven't seen that. Well, it may happen in Californicus. It's possible. But we've gotten good evidence for it in button eye, which is a species I didn't discuss very much, which is why we didn't get into this. But we raised individuals in the lab from where they're isolated from the egg and raised them up to adulthood for some crossbreeding experiments. And then we dissected some of the individuals that were left over from the crossbreeding experiments and found that in one population, all of the individuals that we looked at lacked a penis.
Huh.
Wow. Thank you. For our last question, I know we only have 2 minutes left. Kate, do you mind unmuting and asking your question?
Sure. The question that I have is, I think it's been maybe partially addressed, but what is known about how far they can travel? Actually, there's a three-part question here. How can one track an individual banana slugs? And for the ones with spots, are spots reliable for individual identification?
Okay, let's start with the spots. It's an easier question. Spots are found in certain populations of two species, button eye and columbianus, both in the genus Areolimax and both north. And as you saw on the initial slide with copulation, there's two morphs can mate. In terms of travel, if I were standing on a stage, or for example, if I had, say, put a banana at the start of the talk, if I had put a banana slug on that door on the left behind me, by the end of the talk, we would have no idea where in the room that banana slug had gone to. They don't move, they don't gallop, but they can move pretty steadily when they're inclined. I don't think anyone has looked at it's tracked them in the wild. In terms of spot patterns, there was a paper by some people over in Berkeley, someplace in the East Bay, where they had a spotted population of banana slug, where they followed individuals that were coming to a feeding station in their backyard and felt that that each individual has a unique pattern of spots and that they could follow that over time, which seems very reasonable to me.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that was our last question for the evening, but I just wanted everyone is admiring your cat in the chat. Janet, your cat is lovely. And thank you all for joining so much today. And maybe if we can all unmute and just say thank you to Janet all at once, potentially. So let's all try unmuting and I'll count to 3. After 3, we can all say thank you. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Thank
you.
That was
Thank
super
you.
awesome.
Guys,
Loved
thank
it.
you so much. And yeah, for those of you listening, if you're interested in more events like these for free and discounted rates, please consider joining Bay Nature as a member. And yeah, thank you so much, Janet, for spending this hour with
Oh,
us.
somebody else has got a lovely cat. Yeah,
Oh,
but
yeah.
the talk was my pleasure, and thank you very much for your interest.